Welcome. Welcome to our Wyant lecture this afternoon. I am just delighted to welcome all of you to this afternoon's lecture, and I first want to welcome so many of you who are here. Welcome the members of our board, members of the Wyant and Doherty family who are here, our alums, so many of you, it's great to see you back, and of course our faculty emeriti, our faculty, and our students. I especially welcome our panel of speakers, the Boston Study Group on Middle Eastern Peace. This group has been working together for a number of years on the conflict between Israel and Palestine. They were able to collaborate on their research and discussions to produce their book, Israel and Palestine, Two States for Two Peoples, If Not Now, When? This was published online by the Foreign Policy Association, so it's available to everyone who wants to look at it. But it's certainly a pleasure to welcome such a distinguished group to Emmanuel. And what a timely discussion this week, isn't it? I know it will be very thought-provoking and insightful, and how could it be otherwise with our Louise Doherty Wyant professor, Dr. Lenore Martin, who's leading the group, and she has been speaking to me and to so many of us over so many years about her work with this group that we're delighted to now meet you. A preeminent scholar, Lenore, and preeminent scholar in Middle Eastern Studies, Lenore has been a member of Emmanuel's faculty in the Political Science Department since 1973. She was appointed to the Wyant Professorship last fall, and Lenore has enthusiastically embraced her new role at the college, and we are just thrilled that she's able to share her wisdom, challenge our students as she has done for so many years, and of course enlist engaging speakers like our panel tonight to join us for tonight's lecture. So Lenore, I turn the program over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Sister Janet, and thank you all for coming out on what's going to be at least not a snowy night, simply a cold night. One could question how fitting it is to begin an introduction for such an august group of scholars and writers by quoting the Jon Stewart Daily Show of September 28th. But such is the puzzling nature of the Middle East and the Palestinian-Israeli dispute. John Oliver, those of you who follow the Jon Stewart Show, John Oliver was posing as a real estate broker in Jerusalem. And he suggested that since Israelis and Palestinians can't seem to come to an agreement about how to divide the land, perhaps they should each have the land part of the time. So he said, 50% of the time it would be with one, 50% of the time it would be with another, 100% solution, he said. After all, who would attack the other's house if you were going to live in it in a few months? So that was it. You know, he came to the conclusion. Well, John Oliver is very correct. Palestinians and Israelis are having a very difficult time solving this dispute. And recognizing that impasse has been, recognizing that it's been a very tragic situation for Palestinians, a very difficult situation for Israelis. And all of this has been very detrimental to U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East and in the Muslim world. Our group came together to try to explain the complexity of the situation to the American public and to encourage a more assertive role by the United States in solving the problem. We agreed that the best solution is a two-state solution. So when we started to meet, there was full agreement on that. We turned our attention to writing this online book that would be available to all policymakers and the general public free of charge. Little did we realize that this was going to be a 3-year collegial activity. During the last year, we met almost every week for 2 hours. We discussed our joint policy statement or each other's background chapters. Though not all of us agree with every section, every part of the background chapters, we did come to consensus on the policy statement. The ideas and language used in that statement were very carefully weighed. And as of September, there were already 700,000 hits from 150 countries on the book's Foreign Policy Association website. I didn't get the recent numbers, I'm sorry. I agreed to give, my role here this evening is really like an MC. But I agreed to give a short summation of our policy statement before turning the floor to the panel, because you can hear me almost any time. So I'm going to do this one, setting the scene. We call for a two-state solution framed as a principled peace that allows each people, Palestinians and Israelis, to exercise their right to national self-determination, each within its own independent state. We also believe a solution will be best found through a comprehensive peace, including an agreement between Syria and Israel on the Golan Heights. As we explain in the book, alternatives, such as looking to a one-state solution, will extend the occupation and humiliation of the Palestinian people and jeopardize the existence of Israel as a Jewish majority state as well as a democratic state. We also believe that it is in the interest of the United States to use its leverage through positive and negative incentives when necessary to help the parties reach a negotiated settlement. We believe that would help lessen, it won't end as we saw with Egypt, it will lessen Arab anger towards the United States and weaken the anti-Americanism that helps to fuel extremism in the area. A solution of the conflict would also allow Arab rulers to more easily cooperate with the United States in solving regional problems. The 5 elements of the two-state solution that have emerged from decades of negotiations can be summarized as follows. 1, Israel would withdraw from nearly all of the West Bank and end its blockade of Gaza. The new Palestinian state would be territorially contiguous in the West Bank. That means settlements that are there separate. There will not be settlements there separating this new state. The Israeli settlements would be out. There would be equitable access to water resources and a secure land connection between the West Bank and Gaza. If Israel retains some small agreed-upon portions of the West Bank, then the Palestinian state would be compensated by Israel with land equal in size and value. Secondly, the two sides would agree to security provisions designed to protect them from attack, such as an international force, which the United States may well be part of. 3, Jerusalem would be a shared, open city. Israeli neighborhoods would be under Israeli sovereignty, Palestinian neighborhoods under Palestinian sovereignty. The western portion would become Israel's capital. The eastern part of Jerusalem would be, of course, the Palestinian capital. 4, the holy sites in Jerusalem, the Western Wall, so important to Jews, the Haram el-Sharif, or the Temple Mount, so important, of course, to both Jews and Muslims, but very important to Muslims. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, so important to Christians. All of those would be administered under mutually acceptable terms of sovereignty. 5th, the issue of Palestinian refugees would be resolved in a manner that satisfies the Palestinians' concern for justice and historical recognition, but would not jeopardize Israel's character as a Jewish majority state. Such a resolution would include compensation, resettlement of the Palestinian refugees, either where they're living now or in a different state, in the Palestinian state, or in Israel, if Israel agrees. And lastly, citizenship. Most Palestinians do not have citizenship if they're still refugees in the Middle East, other than if they're living in Jordan. So citizenship is very important. And that would be, of course, a very, a major move. Palestinians would have citizenship either in the state in which they're permanently going to reside in, or in the new Palestinian state. I'm really very anxious to turn the floor over to our panel, each of whom will have to have a very short 5 minutes to speak. We will not be rehashing our chapters because you can read them, and that's why this is up there and you can just Google the Boston Study Group on Middle East Peace, or you can write down the URL if you haven't already read and memorized the book. We really want to leave lots of time for questions and exchange of ideas. Our first speaker, and I'm going to name them all at once, and so that I don't interrupt any more than I have to. Alan Berger is an editorial writer at the Boston Globe who has been writing about the Middle East and Israeli-Palestinian peacemaking efforts since 1982. Professor Herbert Kelman is Richard Clark Cabot Professor of Social Ethics Emeritus and co-chair of the Middle East Seminar at Harvard University. He has been bringing Palestinians and Israelis together in working groups for almost 40 years. Professor Henry Steiner is Jeremiah Smith, Jr., Professor Emeritus at Harvard Law School. Professor Steiner founded the school's Human Rights Program and directed it for 21 years. Professor Harvey Cox is Hollis Research Professor of Divinity at Harvard University. He has worked with the Middle East Peace Program of the World Council of Churches. Professor Stephen Walt is Robert and Renee Belfer Professor of International Affairs at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government and a contributing editor at Foreign Policy magazine. Professor Richard Norton is a professor in the Departments of International Relations and Anthropology at Boston University and visiting professor in the politics of the Middle East at the University of Oxford. Professor Everett Mendelsohn is Professor Emeritus of History of Science at Harvard University. He served as chair of the Middle East program of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences Program on International Security. So what can I say? John Oliver and The Daily Show move over, because here comes the real thing.
I'm going to start by saying something that teachers won't say to you, which is that the chapter I did, all you really need to understand is the title, because everything follows from that. You don't need to read the whole thing if you understand the title, which is The Right Time as Ever. And the idea of it is that there have been other times when there were efforts at a two-state negotiated solution. They didn't bear fruit, but it wasn't because the conditions weren't there or the timing was wrong. The argument is that it was a lack of leadership, political resoluteness, and a certain kind of flexibility. So this was true in Madrid in '91. There was a Madrid peace conference that brought together many countries from the Arab world and Israel, overseen by the U.S. This is at the end of a year in which the Soviet Union collapsed and the U.S. under George Bush the elder drove Saddam Hussein's Iraqi forces out of Kuwait, thereby, with Arab armies' help, saving the Arab state system as it was seen then. And so there was